Today I want to show you two devices that will help you turn a collection of noise like this into cinematic, gorgeous pads like this. Let's dive into it. If you don't want to follow this tutorial, you can grab both instruments that I'm going to create alongside a combination of textures that I think work well over at the Patreon. I'm all about adding field recordings to my music, capturing sounds on my iPhone and then placing them in the bottom of my mix. I spoke about this as washing the canvas in my creative art series. But these sounds are obviously separate to the music. They can set the tone, but what if I want those sounds to be playable, moldable instruments? Let's take a look. The first way to achieve this is something that I featured on the channel a few years ago, but today I'm taking it to the extreme. The second instrument is brand new to this channel, so make sure you don't go anywhere. To get started, you'll want to find some sounds. Here I have three unique sounds. The first being this lake beach sound. The next being a field recording from Morocco. And the final being sounds of birds. I like to place a glue compressor or limiter on each of them to duck some of the louder frequencies and give more of a uniform instrument, but this step is entirely optional. Next, resample and consolidate these sounds onto one new track. From here, we're going to create a pitch or a note to the instrument. To do this, grab an EQ8 and adjust its cue point and gain to the max. Then adjust the frequency to 440 Hz. This will give you the tone frequency of A, and if we duplicate that across 2 or 3 EQ8s, we'll be exaggerating that tone rather than using a utility to increase the gain, which will only exaggerate the noise in the sample as well. Freeze and flatten this track and then drag it onto a new MIDI track. This should automatically populate it inside a simpler device. Swap that simpler to a sampler by right-clicking it and then transpose the key from C3 to A2. That ensures that 440 Hz A is now playing at middle C and is playable across the keyboard. Adjust your start position and then create a fine loop point. This can be adjusted later, but let's create a loop that's quite small to begin with. You'll get less buzz by adjusting the crossfade. If your sample has dead space at the end, adjust that stop position as well. We can create a basic pad by clicking filter and adjusting the amp envelope. Maybe the attack is somewhere between 2 and 5 seconds and the release more like 7 to 10 seconds. We also want to make sure that there are more voices so we can play chords, so increase that number to something like 16. This is sounding interesting already, but we can make it much cooler. Come over to the modulation tab and we're going to turn off LFO1 and turn off LFO2. This gives us a selection of controls at the bottom here. Before that though, select the sawtooth up wave shape and adjust to 30 Hz. Again, this can be changed later. In destination A, we'll select the loop start position and pull that amount up to 100. Now check out your chord progression. How cool is that? When the sample hits the loop point, it randomly displaces what's played amongst the sample. Depending on how long you have that start position heard for, it can become kind of monotonous though. And we can also randomize that. Head over to MIDI, select key, then sample offset, and ensure that this value is greater than that of the loop point. To be safe, you can just set this to the max. Super cool, right? From here, I'd add some modulation to swell and exaggerate the EQ, even sidechain the instrument so it sits under my drums. But what if we wanted to control the EQ from inside the device, and instead of all the notes playing from the same place, each note on the keyboard is playing a unique part of the sample? Well, don't go anywhere because this next bit is insane. But first, let me tell you about today's sponsor, DistroKid. They help me get my music onto hundreds of streaming services, but most importantly, they make it easy for you to promote yourself. From Hyperfollow, which you can link in your bio and story posts, to Playlister. Most of you want those big numbers from playlist streams, but are worried about bots. It's understandable, but with Playlister, you get connected to actual authors of the playlist. Here's my Lo-Fi Focus playlist. If you want to get 7% off and support the show, use the link in the description. Okay, strap in, it's about to get cool. So I've used the previous method for years and it works great. But let's say you wanted to do the same thing, but each key performs kind of randomly. You'll want to download the free Max for Live device, Granulator 3, which you can find in your Ableton project already by typing in Granulator and heading to Packs. Once downloaded, you want to drag in your flattened sample and familiarize yourself with the position, scan, and grain size. Position plays the sample from the selected point, scan defines how fast the line travels through the sample, and grain size is how much of the sample is being processed in milliseconds. I think of it as start, speed, and loop. You'll also want to familiarize yourself with the control view in which you'll have your amp as before. So we can create our basic pad here. There's also envelope 2 here, which we'll be making use of in just a second. Oh, by the way, anything blue can be linked to envelope 2. Right now, our sample plays from the same place and travels through the sample, sort of similar to what we saw in Sampler. To change the starting position for all of our keys, and we can kind of include overlaps, we choose cloud. Fun fact, if you select the loop mode, you'll also enable the sample to travel backwards. I want this filter to open up over time and feel like it's evolving with the chords. It's terrific for an intro. So I'm going to assign envelope 2 to the filter frequency. To do that, we're selecting filter frequency and then turn up envelope 2 to 100. So here we can adjust our envelope to similar settings to our amp envelope, and then set our filter frequency to the starting position. So as the sound increases, the filter also opens up wider. One final thing that you can do is randomize those first 3 pots to get extra wacky. Here I have an LFO device that is assigned to the position, scan, and grain pots, and it's randomizing the average space. How cool is that? Even if somebody uses the same instrument as you, you're getting a totally unique sound depending on what textures you put inside. I utilize these instruments at different times. The granulator introduces more noise as the samples are kind of overlapping, but it creates more variety and is definitely something you can resample for moments and textures. Whereas the first example I use often creates unique instruments that can be a staple in my sound selection. As mentioned, you can find both instruments mapped to their parameters already with a selection of textures that I think work really well over at the Patreon. I hope you enjoyed this episode, guys. I sure did. Thank you so much for swinging by, and I'll see you next time.